Now, this is something very important. When we do the right thing, what do we do for God? We read at the end of the book of Dvarim, God says to us through Moshe Rabbeinu, whenever we fail, the failing is our failing. It doesn't diminish God as much as an iota. If God himself is infinite on the absolute level, you cannot add or detract from him. We find the Torah says when we do a mitzvah, when we bring a sacrifice, it brings pleasure to God. What does it mean it brings pleasure to God? You can't add. If you add, that means there's a deficiency. But if God is perfect and complete, there's no beginning, there's no end. You can't add to him. And you can't detract from him. So whenever we do the right thing, who are we doing the right thing for? When the prophet says, I create this world for my glory, does God need our glory? Does not God need our acknowledgement? The answer is definitely not. Whether we do his will, we don't do the will, versus himself, it means nothing. What it means that if we do the will of God, if we recognize God's glory, we're worthy to have a relationship with him. That's what it means. The world was created for God's glory. I mean, what's considered if one succeeds in this existence after all the challenges? If you recognize his glory. If you recognize his glory, despite all the blind spots, despite all the challenges, then you're worthy of a relationship. That's the meaning for his glory. When you do his will, you're deserving of reward. You enhance the world. The enhancement, whenever we speak enhancing, it's only something which has relevance to us. We advance ourselves, we diminish ourselves. God is not diminished, he's not enhanced. Only when we do his will, then we're worthy and deserving of having a relationship, which is the ultimate level of what? Of reward. And if you choose to go south, to choose evil over good, then there's no basis for a relationship. Therefore, there's a distance. The relationship is terminated. And you're denied. Give an example. A person needs a certain oxygen level. His blood has to be oxygenated to be able to function and feel healthy. Person oxygen level drops, you may have to stop gasping for breath. Your organs, because they're not being supplied with oxygen, blood which is oxygenized with sufficient oxygen, they work and function at a listless level. But if you have the right oxygen level, there's vibrancy, there's energy. You breathe easily. If a person is worthy because he met the challenge and you recognize his glory and you submitted to his will, now you're worthy to have a relationship. What does that relationship do to you? You're infused with it mega energy, which gives you a sense of being which is not comparable in the physical realm. What about if you're living in a spiritual realm and that source of energy is cut? What do? You wither in that realm. The withering in that realm is considered suffering. It's like a person, God put it, has emphysema. Every breath is agony because you're gasping for the breath, you barely could breathe. That's exactly what it's about. But even more than that, because you did the wrong thing in your lifetime, we speak about Gehenna, which is the spiritual purging location. You have to undergo a certain degree of weaning from that evil. And what is that? You have to be purged to extract, to expunge that evil from you. That's what it's about. The way God created this world, it's like you have an inflatable balloon. You have a balloon that you could inflate to be the size of these balloons they fly in the parades. That's its capacity. You take the air out of it, or the helium out of it, just a limp piece of rubber. But if you fill it with that helium to the maximum, it takes on a form, it takes on a shape, and it floats. It floats. The way God created this creation, every soul, every human being has a capacity to be infused. And you can infuse it to a maximum, up to a point. But simultaneously, you could defuse him and take out that spiritual energy. And when he's deflated, he's just a limp piece of cellulose, limp piece of physical matter. That's all he is, which has no value, which is not functioning. So, and that's the balance. Do you infuse it and it inflates, takes on a persona representing something which has relevance to holiness, or you do deflate it and you fill it with something like lead and it's weighty and weighted down that it's literally stuck to the ground. There's such a level of inertia, you can't move yourself. You're stuck in your place. That's the difference between filling it with the right kind of energy, infusing it. Then you take on that persona and all those functions operate and you have those sensitivities. If not, not. But at the end of time, where the evil, which is the basis for challenge, no longer exists, you can't be deflated any longer. If you're inflated, you can't be deflated. Because there's no longer challenge. But the person who failed until that point, he has to be rehabilitated. If he's worthy of having a place in eternity, he has to be rehabilitated. So there is a degree of suffering for that level of rehabilitation. That's the purging process. I'd mentioned the Talmud says in Brachos, first tractate in the Talmud, that as we bless God and acknowledge Him for good fortune, we acknowledge God for tragedy. Good fortune, we thank God that we've come to live to this moment. We're ecstatic. Person wins the lottery. We come upon one of the festivals. It's a time of celebration. We say Shechianu. It's something positive. God forbid a person suffers a tragedy, loses a loved one. The blessing is Dayanos. God is the true judge. There's no iniquity in God's justice. But are we able to internalize the positiveness of it? How we're beneficiaries of that pain? Since we live as physical beings on a experiential level, on an emotional level, on a spirit level, we can't experience the positiveness of that experience. It's painful. And as a result of that, all we could say is, we know it's equitable, we know it's beneficial. All we can say is God is the true judge. There's no iniquity in God's justice whatsoever. What's going to happen at the end of time? Where evil will no longer have any influence on the human being. And you rise to a level that you're able to see it from an objective location and look down, where you're not touched by it. And you function, although you're a physical being, you function within the capacity of a spiritual being. Then you're able to see evil in its true light. That the basis for all our successes is that evil, because the evil is the basis for challenges. It's at a time we don't crave that evil. Today, we crave evil. What do we crave? A human being, we mentioned, is a composite of the animal and the spiritual. All animalistic drives exist within a human being. And the more you tempt it, the more intensified it becomes, those drives. And the Talmud tells us the two most powerful, overwhelming drives of the human being is the sexual drive and the drive to amass material wealth, because that's security. Wealth is power, it's your security, it's power. At the end of time, those drives which emanate from the animal are not going to exist. As a result of that, you will see those drives for what they are. All they represent is negative. They represent negative. And then you'll be able to appreciate, when you're no longer subject to those drives, the value they provided, because they created the context of choice. And if you chose to suppress that, that's the basis for your success. That the person's fortune went down at sea. The Talmud says if a person's boat goes down at sea, a ship, with all his inventory on it, and he takes a very significant financial loss, the blessing says is dynamis. It's painful. He has to declare bankruptcy. He barely has what to eat. He has to mortgage his house. He has to give away everything. That's positive. But you only recognize that because there's no negative impact on you, because you're no longer functioning as a physical being at the end of time. So you recognize truly what that is. So therefore, at the end of time, for such a thing, in retrospect, you would say, Shechianu, thank God I relinquished that. I was released from that, because now that I was released and I was pardoned and I was redeemed, I'm at a different level. There's a beautiful word from the Dum de Magid. One of the promises that God had made to Avram in the covenant between the parts, that your children will be strangers in the land that it's not theirs. They'll be enslaved and afflicted so many years, and then they will go out with great wealth. And we read the story, before we left Egypt, we were told by Moshe, we should borrow from our neighbors, from our masters, that personal effect, the gold and silver vessels. We did. We left Egypt, B'rechush Gadol, with great wealth. Every Jew had minimally 10 pack animals, donkeys laden with gold and silver. That's how much wealth we took out of Egypt. That was the minimum amount per person. And that was the fulfillment of the promise to Avram. But yet there's an opinion in the Midrash that says the Rechush Gadol, the great wealth we received after being redeemed from Egypt, was the giving the Torah at Sinai. That's what the Midrash says. That was the wealth. After you'll be released from that affliction and bondage, you receive great wealth. What is that wealth? God gave the Torah at Sinai. Okay? So there's an obvious question. It's explicit in Torah, the great wealth. We were told to borrow the gold and silver vessels as a fulfillment of that promise to Avram. That was the covenant between the parts. So how could the Midrash say something which is contradictory to what's explicit in the Torah? That the Midrash says the great wealth was Sinai, received the Torah at Sinai. So how do we reconcile the two? So I always mention the Dubna Magid. He explains the word an allegory. He says there was this young man who needed a summer job. He was off from school for 3 months. His father calls his friend who runs a farm, and the friend says, I'm more than happy to hire him for the summer months. And I will pay him well, but he has to work from dawn to dusk. Every day the boy is there, the young man is there from dawn to dusk. At the end of 3 months, he writes him a check for $20,000, which is a very extraordinary salary for 3 months of manual labor, but because it was the friend of his son, the son of his friend, he was more than happy to write it. The boy comes home, the father sees the kids in the doldrums. He said, what's the problem? He said, look, I walked 3 hard months from dawn to dusk, and this boy was illiterate, couldn't read. And he says, after 3 months, look what the man gives me, a piece of paper with some scribble on it. That's a friend of yours. That man has appreciation for what I did for him. So the father looks at the check, and he says, $20,000. This kid should be dancing with joy, but the son doesn't understand because he can't read. Can't read what it says on that paper. So he calls his friend, he says, do me a favor. Take a few silver coins that shine and jingle, put them in a bag and give it to my son. They'll make my son the happiest kid in the world. Takes a few coins, puts them in, and he calls him up, comes, gives them. Now the boy's walking on air when he returns home. His father sees he's cloud 9, excited. So the Dubna Maga says, when we left Egypt, where were we at? The 49th level of spiritual impurity. Did we have any inkling? Do we have a capacity to appreciate to any degree what spirituality was, what God is, to internalize and to be touched by it? We were totally shut down. We had no way to appreciate what that means, what Sinai means, what the Torah means. That one word of Torah is the equivalent of all the 613 mitzvos. That's the mega energy. And what it means to be part of eternity, and what it means to have a relationship with God. There's no what they didn't have the capacity to appreciate that. But God says, after they leave Egypt, I can't leave them empty-handed, bereft and impoverished. So just as a spacekeeper, a placekeeper, you leave Egypt, you can take gold and silver. You'll be ecstatic. Once you come to Sinai and you've achieved the 49th level of spiritual purity, and the 50th day is the day of giving a Torah at Sinai, all your channels are open, rehabilitated to fully internalize and appreciate what that is. There's nothing comparable in existence to what that is. All of a sudden, the gold and silver has no value versus what we're receiving. So the true great wealth is ultimately Sinai. But as a placekeeper, until we arrive at Sinai, because we didn't have the capacity, we had to be given the gold and silver, which in reality, in real time, has no value. No value. Could you imagine if they would devalue currencies and say, from now on, gold has no value, silver has no value? We live in a different world. There's no such thing as purchasing, selling. So what's the value of gold and silver? Torah itself, having connected to the source of all existence, the being who willed existence, the infinite being, the omnipotent being. That's what it's all about. There's no such thing as devaluing that, because that is the basis for everything. That's the real Rechush Godel. That's the great wealth. When we came to Sinai, looking back, whatever we were subject in the past, it was hard to believe that we were ever there, because we were able to appreciate what it represents, how what its level of abomination is. It's abominable. I'll give you an example. We'll go back to 1965, Baltimore, Maryland. And I'd mentioned there was a doctor, a dermatologist, who as a young man studied the Chavrusa, study partner of Rebbe Chana Wasserman. His name was Dr. Seidel. Wasn't an observant Jew. He had his medical office was on East Utah Street in Baltimore, downtown Baltimore. In those days, when you go to East Utah Street, the police used to walk the streets walking with German shepherds. That's how dangerous it was. And if you drive through the neighborhood, they would stop and say, please close your buttons. Because somebody, as you drive, could pull open the door and pull you out. This is the neighborhood it was. So he treated yeshiva bachrim, yeshiva students, gratis, didn't charge him anything. So remember, it was 1966, not 65. I'm going down and I had an appointment down there. In those days, you didn't take a cab. You couldn't afford a cab. So we took a bus. So a bus from where the yeshiva was till downtown Baltimore. It took about an hour. 15 cents, you paid for the bus, you got on that bus and you went. And this bus ride, when you drive, it'd go through many neighborhoods till finally you get down to this address and you go through, and I'm passing through neighborhoods. I passed by a golf course and I was we were so immersed in learning in the yeshiva. There were 3 months, you didn't have to walk out of the building. That was the level of involvement and immersion we were in Torah studies. This is like almost the first time I'm leaving the building in 3 months. I'm being exposed to the world. I passed by a golf course. In those days, they had caddies where the caddy carried the golf clubs on his back. And I see these people standing on the golf green with clubs, trying to hit the ball into the hole. I think to myself, these people, they're wasting their lives away. Is that what life's all about? To go on a golf green, with their fancy golf shoes, with their cardigan shirt and their slacks and their sun visor on their head, swinging to hit the ball. Is that what it's all about? Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make sense. Go further down, go to the other neighborhood, the candy stores on the corners. People sitting outside, playing dominoes, drinking beer, drinking wine, fighting in the street. Yeah, I think to myself, this is an existence. What do these people exist for? It's just a waste of life. Sit and just whittle away your life with worthlessness. It's almost painful to see. Until finally I arrive. Why did I see the world in that light? I was so removed from what that was about. Even the rich man on the golf green, or who knows what the entry fee for that, to pay the yearly subscription fee for that golf course. You had to maybe be a wealthy man to pay it. But I said, these people are wasting their lives. But once you get back into the feed bag, so to say, and back into the trough, you lose your clarity. You say, that's what it's all about. You know what it means to eat in that 5-star restaurant? You know what it means to you have to go to a restaurant, you have to have a reservation. You know what it means to say that you have to be dressed only in formal wear. You can't go in that restaurant. That's what it's all about. You got it? When you're fully removed from it, you say, you got to wear a monkey suit when you go in there. That's the way you see it. But when you're in the cage in the zoo, you see it like the animal. That's what it's all about. Wearing the monkey suit. And you wait for the zoo attendant to bring you your daily fare to throw it into the cage. That's what it's all about. Pre-Sinai, we're in the 49th level of impurity. Torah is infinite. The world was created with Torah. Torah is the only connection to God. What's God? It's a word. He could do this, he could do that. But what does he mean to me? The sense of relationship. There's no sense. I'll give you an example. You say to a person, you see this man? He's the most special person who walks the face of the earth. He's so special, you cannot not love him. And you give him a printout on all his qualities. And you read it, and you study it, and you look at him, and you say, evidently the man must be wrong. I feel no love for him. I don't seem to be that special person. I don't see this. Of course you don't see him, because you don't know him. Once you get to know him and you're touched by him, then you begin sensing why he's so special. But until you get to know him, you're at arm's length. How do you have no sense? You have no sense, you have no positive feeling. There's nothing drawing you there. When we left Egypt, what were we? Totally the other end of the world. We're a different planet. We had no relevance to what God was all about. Only through the 49 days of rehabilitation, of inching our way up that mountain, and we finally reached the summit on the 50th day. That was called Sinai. We were ready for the real time. Now that we peeled away all these barriers, all these layers, which, could you imagine going to the ocean in a wetsuit? Could you feel the water? You're wearing a wetsuit, insulated wetsuit. You have no sense you're even in the water. You could be in the ocean, but you have no sense of the ocean. Maybe the sound of the waves, but that's about it. It was even more than that. It was even more extreme than that. We're entombed. The daily process. Every day, we're inching closer. It's like a person through physical therapy. Every day gets a greater sense of his limbs. You're reactivating the nerves, the nerve endings. I'm getting a sense of feeling. My taste buds are starting to work. I can taste the sweetness. I can taste the bitterness. I know how to discern between good and evil now. Because now my senses are working. In Egypt, the senses were inoperative. They didn't work. You couldn't tell the difference between good and bad. That's where we were. We were comatose in Egypt. So it's only at Sinai could we fully appreciate the good of evil, the good of pain. We no longer say dino emes. God is a true judge because you don't sense it with your emotion. When you win the $100 million lottery, there you're touched. Because what it represents is everything, every bit of what we are. But when you have the Torah, unless you have it, you have no sense what it is. I'll give you an example. You raise a child. I say to my grandchildren, I said, what do you want to be when you get older? You want to be a great Talmud Chacham? And they say, yes, we want to be a great Talmud Chacham. Do they know what that is? They know their father is that, their grandfather is that. These people, they know it's something good. It's something they want to be because these people they value, they love, are that. But do they have any sense what that is? Of course they don't. They're children. It doesn't make a difference. But setting that as the goal, if they strive for that and they mature and they reach adulthood and they're mentored with that, then they'll have a sense of what that is. But as a child, it's, I want to be this. It's like you say to a kid, I want to be a fireman. I want to be a policeman. The kid has a 300 IQ and he wants to be a policeman. You got it? Or a fireman. Or a sanitation worker. Because he likes the way their uniforms look. Right? And he may even become the commissioner of sanitation. You never know. But the kid has a 300 IQ. Is that what he wants to be? As a child, not understanding. That's what he says. Before we came to Sinai, we were like that 3-year-old kid. We had no idea what that was. So what put our minds at ease and satisfied us? You have a birthday party with balloons and birthday hats. And everybody screams, happy birthday. The 3-year-old kid's excited. But here, the problem is today you have 80-year-old people. The same birthday hat, the same balloons and noisemakers, and he's also just as excited. This 80-year-old man has never grown up since he's 3 years old. Except today you blow out 80 candles, not 1 candle or 3 candles. That's what people are. As we say, some people never grow up. Most people never grow up. When they should grow up, they never grow up. We used to say, wake up before it's too late. Brian, remember that one? Wake up before it's too late. And you have to have a merit to wake up. You have to have a merit to take advantage of opportunity. You got to see it right. Most people don't see it right. I'm not saying they live irresponsibly in the material, but what right is truly right, they don't understand what that is, and therefore they don't go in that direction. They don't strive in that direction.